Okay, a very good evening to everybody. So let's start with today's session. In the previous session, we had discussed Edmund Spencer, his works, controversial life. Today, we will be marching forth to another important chapter from this time. So, what my handling would be with all the playwrights, actually Elizabethan time and Jacobean era, they're like very close. They're one after the other. And there, several playwrights were also writing in the era of Queen Elizabeth. And they continued writing into the Jacobean era as well. So I am going to be the playwrights from both these eras. So we could easily discuss all of them in succession, right? So another important figure from the Elizabethan time who was also writing during the Jacobean era is Marston. And Dryden, another important figure.
Wow.
Nishi, I request you to please mute yourself. All right, thank you. So another important figure from a time that was to come, John Dryden, he said about Ben Johnson, quote, "As for Johnson, I think him the most learned and judicious writer which any theatre ever had. He was deeply conversant in ancients, both Greek and Latin, and he borrowed boldly from them. If I would compare him with Shakespeare, I must acknowledge him the more correct poet, but Shakespeare the greater wit. Shakespeare was the Homer or father of our dramatic poets. Johnson was the Virgil, the pattern of elaborate writing. I admire him, but I love Shakespeare." So, this is him comparing Shakespeare and Ben Jonson and highlighting what is special about Shakespeare and what is special about Ben Jonson. So you remember I told you how Shakespeare was not a university graduate. He was not amongst the university wit. He did not have a very extraordinary education, yet he could create such, he came up with such dramatic art that made him exceptional, that made him stand out from the crowd. And he appealed to human emotions, right? And he exercised wit. He was not in possession of the knowledge of ancients. And, he was not very conversant in all this like Ben Jonson was. But still Shakespeare, though during that time, Ben Jonson was more popular with, as time progressed, Shakespeare became more, became the more dominant figure. So Ben Jonson too is a very important figure from that time. And like Dryden has mentioned, he was very conversant in ancient knowledge. And he had a very thorough knowledge of Greek and Latin. And he borrowed heavily from the classical models, right? So he was more proper in that sense because he was adhering to all, ingredients of drama or say tragedy that was expounded by Aristotle. He was adhering, and we know that Shakespeare was refuting it all. He was innovating. He was designing his plays in a fashion that appealed the audiences. And he did not mind tweaking around with the unities that Aristotle held so strongly, right? So this is the difference between Ben Jonson and Shakespeare. So Ben Jonson was a character who was very pedantic, he was imitative in nature because he imitated the classics, and supremely self-confident in his learned art. He had an air of that confidence that came, that came from his learning And he is the one great example in English of the Renaissance humanist turned dramatist and poet, right? So he was a humanist because he borrowed heavily from the classics, but he was also a dramatist and a poet, right? Both rolled into one. So his important works, Every Man in His Humor, Every Man Out of His Humor, this came out consecutively. The first came out in 1598. Every Man Out of His Humor came out in 1599. And we know 1603 is the time when Queen Elizabeth dies. And James I, who is also James VI of Scotland, becomes the monarch of England, right? So these are the compositions, these are the texts, the plays that came out during Elizabethan period. And anything that is after Elizabeth's death comes in the category of Jacobean drama, right? So Cynthia's Rebels was acted in 1600. So, the publication date and the date of performances are different. So if ever it is asked about, if ever a question comes up regarding a specific occurrence like the performance or the publication, you have to pay attention to that, right? And then the other important text, the Poetaster, that came out in 1601, Walpole or the Fox, that came out in 1605, Epicyon or the Silent Woman, 1609, The Alchemist, that is the most popular one, and I did during my bachelor's, I remember. The Alchemist came out in 1610. So now Walpole, Epicyon, The Alchemist, Bartholomew Fair, these are the texts that came out during King James I time when he was on the throne. So it comes under the category of Jacobean drama, right? And there were also two tragedies that Johnson had wrote. One was Sejanus, His Fall, and the second, Katyal, His Conspiracy in 1611, right? I'm going to be talking about all of them in a little detail because we are not going to delve too much. That is going to take a lot of time. So I will, refrain from doing that. But before I start the discussion of his plays, there is something that I need to tell you about his technique of characterization. So, he was well known. He was very well known for comedy of humors. Note the word humors. So comedy, not something that is comic. No, not something that is, that invokes a sense of jest or laughter. No. Comedy in that sense, divine comedy, right? Comedy, archaic usage of that word. It is, it means a play, right? It is not comedy the way we understand it today. Comedy is a drama, right? So drama of humors, that is what is the meaning of comedy of humors, right? And also comedy, you can also call it a comedy. Why? Because there are certain comic elements in the play as well. And, the characters who have certain specific traits, they're actually criticized in a very tongue-in-cheek fashion and with an intent of correction, right? And as per Comedy of Humors that Ben Johnson was writing, every individual character in his work actually was marked by one characteristic distortion or eccentricity based on one of the four humors, right? So, the characters had some specific trait, an exaggerated trait that was targeted by the playwright, and that was, that was criticized and criticized with an intent, with the intention of correction, like I said, right? So there were four humors: blood. Please note all this that I'm telling you: blood, phlegm, choler, and melancholy, right? So blood, which is also sanguine, it represents sociable and pleasure-seeking individuals, pleasure-seeking characters. Phlegmatic characters are relaxed and quiet by nature. Choleric are ambitious and leader-like, right? So if they are driven by excessive ambition, like Dr. Faustus, that is actually a choleric character. And melancholic characters are introverted and thoughtful. If you have read Shakespeare's As You Like It, there is this character, Jacques, who is very thoughtful and very deep and profound. And the deepest of lines in the play comes from that character, Jacques. So, this is how you could put different characters in different categories, the four humors, right? So this was about humors, and there were also later comedies that Johnson had composed, apart from what I had just told. These comedies were not very popular. And among these are The Devil is an Ass, that came out in 1616. The Staple of News, 1625. The New Inn, 1629. The Magnetic Lady, 1632. A Tale of a Tub. So A Tale of a Tub is a text who was also written by Jonathan Swift, which we are going to get to that at a future point. So do bear this in mind, that A Tale of a Tub is also a composition of Ben Johnson, right? So, and other unfinished pastoral dramas that he had composed, The Sad Shepherd or A Tale of Robin Hood, right? And then a few important lines from Ben Jonson. Drink to me only with thine eyes. Slow, slow, fresh pond. Queen and huntress chaste and fair. Perhaps later I could share my handwritten notes with you, since I did not make a PPT. So I think it's going to be a good idea, sharing my handwritten notes on Ben Jonson and whatever is being discussed today. So a little bit about Johnson's life. He was into bricklaying and soldiering, right? And so he did not have a very noble background. And he was a violent character also. He was accused of slaying an actor in a duel, and consequently he was imprisoned for that. And he was in a very fierce literary quarrel with his fellow dramatists. Who were they? It was Marston and Dekker. We are going to come to these two playwrights after we have discussed Johnson. So it was John Marston and Thomas Dekker with whom he was in quarrel with, right? And another important trivia about Ben Jonson is that he journeyed to Scotland on foot. I don't know how is that possible, though. It must have taken many days. And so he was also a purveyor of masks to King James I's court. So, what masks are, and in between plays, short plays. So he was a principal purveyor of all the masks during King James I's reign. And he was also in a very bitter feud with Inigo Jones, another architect. He was the architect and, the stage director of his masks, and he was quarreling with him too. So he must have been a very aggressive person. That is what I conjecture about his personality. And Dryden, in an essay of dramatic poesy, provides a model analysis of Johnson's Epicene, or the Silent Woman. We are going to come to that. Let's first discuss his plays, and then later we can, talk about this point. So, Every Man in His Humor. It came out in 1598. It is a comedy of intrigue, and it is inspired by Roman comedy. Again, he borrowed heavily from the classics and the ancients. So this too has a Roman lineage. And Johnson wanted to present a satiric picture of his own age of contemporary human foibles as he considered Plautus and Terence had done. So he was emulating these literary giants of the past, Plautus and Terence, right? And what he did was to, provide to the readers a very satiric commentary of the contemporary ways of life in this play, Every Man in His Humor. And in prologue, he attacked both the themes and the conventions of contemporary drama and contrasted his own aim. So, he was criticizing all the playwrights who were deviating perhaps from the unities, and they were not, on several grounds. He was, whoever he was unhappy with, whoever he was not convinced with in terms of literary compositions, he was attacking them all in his plays. And the prologue has all that attacks, right? And a conscious reformer of the stage, that was he, a conscious reformer of the stage, who sees himself doing something both artistically better and morally worthier than his own contemporaries, and wants to be more correct in structure, and he wants to, he thinks he was writing things, he was composing his plays in a fashion that was more contemporary in theme and more improving in effect, right? So, he had this idea, he had this feeling that he was doing something more superior than what the other playwrights were doing. So again, the air of confidence that he had around him, it is because of his profound learning, right? And as per him, the function of comedy was the reproving of human foibles by holding them up to ridicule. So whichever characters were ridiculed, they were done with the intent of bringing them on track for the purpose of correction, right? It was not just, done plainly to just make fun of them. No, that it wasn't done to just entertain, but it was also morally instructional. It was also a lesson for all those who could relate with those characters that were being ridiculed on the stage, right? And he developed, like I mentioned, a comedy of humors, a comedy that is in which each character is seen to be dominated and even obsessed by one particular quirk. So one particular characteristic, one particular quirk is exaggerated in that character, and that character was targeted for that, right? And this was comedy of humors. Because, if it's a choleric character, obviously a sense of ambition and leader-like quality would be exaggerated in that person, and that quality would be ridiculed, would be attacked by Ben Johnson in his plays. This is the quality of his plays, right? And a humorous character is bound to be a caricature, right? He is not presented as a normal. See, if any quirk, any characteristic is exaggerated in a person, obviously that person, what are caricatures? Some physical aspect of them is exaggerated, be it head, be it hands, anything. So, if in a person's nature, if something is exaggerated, that is actually presented in a very caricature-like, quality on the stage, and that character is never presented as a fully realized human being, but only as a fop, and the jealous as the jealous, that fop, that exaggerated character could be anything, could be anybody. It could be a jealous husband, it could be an anxious father, an uncouth country cousin, aping city manners. It could be anything, right? And the hypocritical Puritan or some similar type, right? So if any single trait is exaggerated, that is caricatured, that is, that is presented as somebody who is not a fully realized human being, right? A fop, somebody who is imitating the others, right? And that person is ridiculed with the intent of bringing or correcting that attribute of the person. Yes, Junaid, caricatures are very easily found anywhere in newspapers. You must have seen cartoons as well with certain traits exaggerated. So I remember when I was young, I used to watch Popeye the Sailor Man, and that was somewhat caricatured because Popeye's hands were quite bulky, bulkier than his body frame. That perhaps was done with the intent of bringing about the idea of strength that he had. So this is how visual art could be used to bring out certain personality trait of a character, right? And this is how a trait in a person on the stage in Ben Jonson's plays were presented as caricatures with exaggerated traits, with something about them that is exaggerated. If it is an anxious father, that anxiety is so exaggerated that it seems very odd to the onlookers, right? So this is how his plays are, right? And Every Man in His Humor was first set in Italy, was soon changed to London, whose life and manners were always Johnson's real interest. So he had a lot to say, he had a lot to criticize about London life. So the setting was altered according to that. So, first it was Italy, then it became London. It was to bring to, everybody's mind that there is something wrong. So people take cognizance of that. The Londoners take cognizance of that, right? And the action of the play exhibits follies, the obsessions, the presentations and the absurdities of the different characters. The foolish and boastful are gulled, criticized, and exposed. Plots and disguises help to forward the intrigue. So there is a lot of disguising also in his plays. And at a later point, that disguise is, that cover is busted. That leads to the exposition. And the play ends in reconciliation and mirth. So there is an idea of reconciliation towards the end. There is an idea of mirth, of happy endings, right? So whatever was done was with the intent of correcting, to send out a message that, see, if you have this trait in you, and if it is over exaggerated, you better bring it within the normal bounds, right? You better check it. So this is how his plays were composed. So Every Man in His Humor has this character Novel. He's the father, and he is very suspicious about his son's moves. He is a city gallant, and he has the plan of spying on his son over and over again, and which is actually thwarted by his servant Brainworm. So even the names are very they tell a lot about a person's character. Novel, he wants to know what his son is doing, right? Brainworm, because he could be causing a lot of trouble in everybody's psychology because of all the in whatever ways he's jeopardizing the plans of catching his son, right? So and it rings a bell. If you have attended my previous sessions, you remember I told you that such names were used during morality plays. So it is in keeping with that tradition. It is actually reminiscent of that, right? So it is an important point. And another text, Every Man Out of His Humor, which came out after Every Man in His Humor, it concentrates on the illustration of ridiculous humors like the previous one. And the characters are Carlo Buffoon, Fastidious Brisk, Sordido, Fungoso. The names are very peculiar. You wouldn't find such names in everyday life. And it isn't common. Such names are not common today. Such names were not very common in Johnson's time as well. And I wouldn't get into the details of this text. It is for you to read. And then the other text that is of significance here is Cynthia's Rebels. Now, it was acted in 1600 by the boys of the Queen's Chapel, right? And it was actually a satire on contemporary gallantry using mythological characters. So see how mythology is being used, how mythological characters are being used for contemporary criticism, right? And the characters are Diana, who is also called Cynthia. We have Queen Elizabeth. Diana represents Queen Elizabeth. And then we have Cupid, we have Mercury, we have Echo, we have Narcissus. It rings a bell again. Echo, Narcissus, Cupid, they're all coming from somewhere. Can somebody tell me where? From where is it all coming? Can anybody tell me? These characters, where do you find? Echo, Narcissus, Cupid. Okay, nobody. I'll tell you. Ovid's Metamorphoses, right? And there are several, and you know the characters, there are some minor characters that are actually reference to actual living characters of those times. So since it's a contemporary, a text that satirizes contemporary passion and gallantry, obviously, you know, some person must be in his mind while he was designing these characters, right? So, and he concludes the play with an epilogue, by God, 'tis good, and if you like it, you may, right? So, and then another important text by Ben Johnson, The Poetaster. And it was actually a vindication of his position against his enemies. His enemies, Thomas Dekker and John Marston, right? And the text, this specific work, it is actually set in Augustan Rome. And we see Horace, that is Johnson himself, moving with dignity in the literary world of Rome, friends of Virgil and Augustus Caesar, though pursued by the envy of fools and knaves, and you know, Ovid, Propitius, Tibullus, all these characters from the Roman past, you know, they're a part of this text. And Horace, that is also Johnson. See, this is a text where he is trying to establish a dominant position as a playwright, as a dramatist, as compared to his enemies. So he is seeing himself as Horace, right? And there is much learned reference to Latin literature in the text. And Ovid's famous encounter with a boar, which he records in book 1 of his Sermons, is turned into an encounter with, okay, there is this very specific incident where, you know, he has presented another character, another playwright, another contemporary playwright, Marston, in an amusing street scene. So he's also, you know, talking about other contemporaries other than Thomas Dekker and Marston. And in this text, in the Poetaster, where this specific character, Crispinus, who represents John Marston, is given an emetic. You know what emetic is? Something that induces a vomit, right? So this character is given, Crispinus is given an emetic, which forces him to vomit up his long Latinate words. And at times, comedy in his hands degenerates into farce. You know, so this is very farcical text where he has left no opportunity in criticizing his contemporary, and even John Marston is involved in this criticism, not just Thomas Dekker and so yeah, you have the contemporaries being ridiculed here, being very severely criticized, right? And then we have Walpole or the Fox. It came out in 1605 and is the first and the greatest of a series of comedies, which shows Johnson's characteristic mixture of savagery and humor, of moral feelings and grim relish, absurdities of which human nature is capable of. So these notes have been made out of David Datchus, and he has a very artistic way of writing things. So, just to plainly put, I'll say that, it's a mixture of farce and humor. It's not just sophisticated comedy. You would find farcical elements in this text. And it is actually a story of a cunning man who feigned a mortal illness, who, acts around and says, I have a mortal sickness. I am ill. And whoever is, my successor, he did not have a successor. So he will just give away his belongings, his properties to the person who makes him the happiest. So, so when his neighbors, they get to know about this, they come and they, quote his favors in the hope of being named as their heirs, right? So here are people coming in to please him in different ways. And one disinherits his son. There is this one neighbor who even, goes to the extent of disinheriting his own son in order to name Walpole his heir, thus proving his friendship, while another neighbor, normally jealous of his pretty wife, is induced to persuade her to give herself to the dying man. So, he asks his own wife that, go and please Walpole, it's okay. Who's otherwise jealous of his wife is actually going to the extent of sending, he is going to the extent of suggesting her that go and please him in the bed. And the whole play is set up in Renaissance Italy. And Walpole's opening words as he pays his daily worship to his wealth, these lines are important. This was asked in net examination. So the lines are, "Good morning to the day and next, my gold. Open the shrine that I may see my saint." So, worshipping gold, worshipping materiality, right? So Celia, who is Corvino's wife, the jealous husband Corvino, expresses her horror when she discovers that her husband intends to force her to Walpole's bed. And, it shows Johnson's moving closer to what one might call Elizabethan romantic tragedy than he ever moved again. So, this is romantic tragedy, that a husband and wife, otherwise in love, the husband is suggesting, go and be with someone else for some time. So Corvino is the jealous husband and Celia, his wife. And again, Corvino, exaggerated behavior. He's also jealous. And he is also, I could call, ambitious. So in that sense, choleric, right? So the other important text, Epicyon, or the Silent Woman, another interesting story. This text was admired by Dryden, and it was analyzed in his essay of dramatic poesy. So take a note of this. And the principal character, the protagonist here in this play, is a guy named Morose. And he has a humor. He has an exaggerated characteristic, that is, of being unable to stand noise. He cannot stand noise whatsoever. And he lives surrounded by silence. He marries a young girl, supposed to be perpetually silent, a woman who can't speak. He deliberately marries that woman in order to, stay away from noise. and in order to disinherit his nephew. Otherwise, his nephew would have taken all his property and stuff if he doesn't marry, right? So he was forced to marry someone. So he decides to marry a girl who could not speak, who was mute. But the girl turns out to be an incessant talker. Imagine. And the nephew finally agrees to arrange a divorce in return for a satisfactory financial statement. So in the end, what happens? It is revealed that the girl was actually a boy. So disguise here, and that was a boy in disguise. And the whole thing has been a plot by the nephew to gull his uncle. So the exaggerated character is gulled, is ridiculed, made fun of, and everything is exposed in the end, all the disguise. And there is a reconciliation towards the end. And then we come to the other text, the other play, The Alchemist. And it is also a satiric comedy. And it deals with a pretended alchemist whose victims include a great variety of characters, all of whom are attracted by the hope of easy gold. So, they're all gold chasers. The characters that are ridiculed, they are all materialistic. And this materialism is criticized. This was the reality back then. Also, this is the reality today as well. So it does have a contemporary appeal, but not as much as Shakespeare. That is my personal observation. So, this situation enables Johnson to display a great variety of human weakness and hypocrisy. They're all gold chasers and they're all hypocrite. A man who's actually jealous of his wife decides to give her away in want of gold, right? So this is hypocrisy, and that is criticized. Such traits are criticized in his plays. And the characters include Love-wit. He's the master who leaves for some time, and the servants, they disguise themselves as alchemists, and several characters come with the intention of having gold converted from something trivial, right? Something trivial, they would present something trivial and that would be converted into gold. So everybody wants easy money. So there is another character, Drugger, who's a tobacco merchant. So Drugger, the name is relatable. And Dapper, a lawyer's clerk. And Sir Epicure Mammon is also another character. So it's an Epicurean character. And two Puritan brethren of Amsterdam too come. So, like I said, different characters, they come with the hope of easy money and they're all criticized. And then we come to Bartholomew Fair. It is Johnson's mature satiric comedy and mostly English in atmosphere. The setup is also England, and it is set in a fair. Not going into the details of this particular text, but let's move on to the discussion of Sejanus and Katyal. Again, these are minor works, so not discussing their plot. So, but one important point to note about Sejanus is that Richard Burbage and Shakespeare both acted in this play, right? So it was moved probably by the success of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. He was inspired by the success of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. So, with the hope of making it big himself, just like Shakespeare did, he wrote two tragedies. These two tragedies, Sejanus and Katyal, but they were not successful. And he chose less well-known incidents from Roman history, but he drew on the original Latin sources for these texts, right? Because he was a writer of he was an great emulator of the classical past. He was again writing, about history, about incidents that were not very well known, right? That establishes his scholarship. He was an erudite personality. He knew a lot. And he even cited in his preface the actual editions of the Latin authors that he had used in these texts. And in Sejanus, he did not keep to the classical unity of time. So, perhaps Shakespeare's success at this stage perhaps must have moved him to experiment with his own craft, to, leave that, that strict adherence behind and be a little innovative in terms of plot construction. And he had not, something that this is something that he had not observed, since a long time. He had never observed this, such an experimentation, but he had to do, perhaps the success of Shakespeare must have moved him to do this. And then Johnson's later comedies have been mentioned already. And then we come to another text, Eastward Ho. So it was actually a collaboration. It was actually a play written in 1605, which was a collaboration of three rivals, otherwise enemies. They were often fighting and then collaborating, fighting on and off, bittersweet relationship. Johnston, Marston, and Chapman, right? Chapman was not a rival per se, but Marston was. We know Marston because he was criticized in one of his texts, right? So the plot is a bourgeois morality dealing with the city's goldsmiths, two apprentices, right? So this text, Eastward Ho, it deals with a goldsmith, his daughter, and two apprentices, his two apprentices. Now, out of the two, one is a virtuous person and the other is vicious. And the goldsmith too has two daughters. One is young, sweet and modest, and the other is elder, foolish and worldly, right? And there's this whole drama that ensues, all the love equation. But, the virtuous one towards the end ends up marrying Goldsmith's younger daughter, who is the sweeter one, who is a better character, right? And there was a continuous, okay. So this was Eastward Ho. And during the Elizabethan period and even Jacobean era, there was a continuous demand for new plays, and which actually led to dramatists trying to draw from different distinct sources, from Italian novelle, they were borrowing from classical history, and on recent English and European history. They were, old plays, stories, legends, or any sort of revenge, stories about ambitious men, or, any overreaching character like Faustus was. So, this was a time when people were actually running about for new ideas, right? And this is the time when Chapman and Marston and Johnson, they were writing and they were having a hard time finding new original ideas, because plays were being produced in such in such volume that it seemed like everybody was copying somebody, right? So, and Chapman was a playwright who infused an ethical and philosophical spirit into his plays, right? And John Marston was the type who became intoxicated by exuberant language and produced some quite extraordinary fustian. So, this was something that is criticized by Johnson, that he was so overwhelmed with exuberant language, with, high sounding words, that he is seen as, vomiting out all those words in Latin in his texts, right? So this was one exaggerated character of Marston that was targeted. And then there was this another playwright by the name of Cyril Tourneur. I'll spell it for you: Cyril, Cyril, and Tourneur, Tourner, Cyril Tourneur. He played variations on old revenge themes. So he was a writer of the revenge plays. And then there was John Webster. He is important. And also John Ford. These were the playwrights who explored the individual moment of passion with haunting poetic brilliance. And Webster's plays were very, how shall I put it? Very sadistic. And, you would see his characters deriving sadistic. He was a revenge writer, a writer of revenge plays, and his characters would find satisfaction with someone's misery, with someone's tragedy. And obviously, also the characters avenging their murdered relatives, like in The White Devil. We will get to that. And so many plays of the period have not survived. The first librarian of the Bodleian Library, Oxford, which was opened in 1602, was instructed by Sir Thomas Bodley to reject plays and similar baggage books for fear of scandal, right? Because there was no censorship back then. And yes, the plays were scandalous often. So, Sir Thomas Bodley, after whom the Bodleian Library at Oxford is named, he instructed that these plays must not be, put on record. They must not be here in the library building to avoid any controversy, right? So the reason many of these plays have not survived into posterity, right? And we don't have them with us today. And Puritan hostility towards the playhouse. Also, how after Civil War, after the death of Charles I, the successor of James I, see, it was first Queen Elizabeth I, then came James I, and then came Charles I, right? So Charles I was beheaded. There was a civil war. I will get to the details at a later session. We will dedicate one session to this. So it was a period of interregnum. There came a period of interregnum after Charles I was beheaded, and it was the time of puritanical control. The Puritans took over. And who were the Puritans? Puritans were also Protestants who wanted further purification of the church, right? Ergo, the name Puritans, right? Because they were not happy with what the Protestant project had ended at. They wanted more reforms in church. So they are an offshoot of Protestantism itself, but they were very strict. They adhered to Bible word by word, right? And they were not into indulgences of any sort. I even read somewhere that during this puritanical control, when Oliver Cromwell was, in control of the affairs of England, even wine was banned. Because, anything that was considered an indulgence was banned. The reason theaters were closed in 1642, which brought an end to all the dramatizations. All the theaters were shut. The playwriters were not writing anymore for the fear of prosecution. For the fear of sedition, because, if theaters were shut, who would come to see the plays, right? So it was actually an end to a long stretch of, dramatic compositions. So Puritan hostility was also the reason why several texts have not survived into posterity, because several libraries were attacked, right? And Puritan hostility towards the playhouses increased rather than diminished. And when the Puritans finally gained control of the government, they closed the theaters. The closing of the theaters in 1642 brought this greatest of all periods in the history of English drama to an end, right? So this is how this this period of dramatic excellence came to an end with the closing of the theatres in 1642. So before that time, there are several minor writers whom we will be discussing. So one of them is also George Chapman. Now we're going to be taking him in a little more detail. So if you remember, if you have read John Keats, he had written on Chapman's Homer, right? So one ode is dedicated to this specific playwright. So he was a translator of Homer, actually, right? And he also produced 5 tragedies, which show the Elizabethan interest in Stoic philosophy, right? And his text, one is Busied Emboys, or you could call it, if it were to be pronounced in French, it would be Busied Ambois, 1604. I think that is the real pronunciation of it. It is actually a study of an old soldier like Othello, lost and betrayed in a peacetime world of courtly intrigue. But the traitor is as much his own passion. So who is the traitor? What is his own flaw, his own character flaw, which takes him completely by surprise in welling up in affection for a married lady of the court. So here is this Othello-like figure who falls in love with a lady at the court, and his own personality trait is the villain here. And his great men try to achieve, the great men that Chapman presents in his text, they try to achieve a stoic calm, right? They try to come to something that is, stoic in nature. And Clement de Amboise is the revenge of Busy de Amboise, achieves Senecan detachment. So that is all technical details that I have noted. I think this is not of importance. So much detail is not going to be asked from you. So this text, Busy de Amboise, is one. Then we have Chabot, Admiral of France, or Chabot, Admiral of France, 1613. Then we have Caesar and Pompey, which was printed in 1631. And they both explore different aspects of Stoic virtue. And in the text, the interest centers on the exemplary Stoic calm of Cato and the achievement of such calm by Pompey as well. So, the characters coming to a Stoic calm. And moving on. And there's another work by Chapman by the name of All Fools, which is actually a plot inspired by Terence. So he was also emulating the classics. So now we come to the discussion of John Marston. He was born somewhere around 1634, and he began as a writer of coarse and violent verse satires, right? He started off coarse, and he is marked by lavish vocabulary, like I mentioned before, and he shows the same extravagant language in melodramatic tragedies of love and revenge and cynical comedies, which combine bitter exposure of human folly and ambition with wild farce. So his texts are farcical. There is, it is loaded with vocabulary. See, I believe you have to, if you have to compose something that is, that could appeal to the public, you have to practice moderation. If you are writing too simple, even that would not be good. And if your writing is excessively ornated, even that is not going to be working in your favor. So this is something that Marston was doing. He was overdoing vocabulary, and his important works, not important, but his works, Antonio and Melida, which came out in 1599, and Antonio's Revenge. Now, like I said, he was a revenge writer. So both are set in Italy, And Italy back in that time was seen as a land of political violence, with a lot of politics and a lot of psychological extravagance, right? So often the setup used to be Italy. And Antonio and Melida, the text Antonio and Melida, deals with the intercomplications of private passions and political malice in a plot made up of elements from many different stock Elizabethan dramatic situations. So several stock elements borrowed from the Elizabethan times, and it is given, heightened political, there's a lot of private passion involved in the plot. There is a lot of political malice, and this is how he fashions his plays. And a relatively well-known play from Marston is The Malcontent, which was printed in 1604. And this play was adapted by John Webster. And this play, The Malcontent, was dedicated to Ben Johnson. This is important. And after they had resolved their conflict, Marston and Johnson, they were rivals, but when everything was resolved, Marston decided to dedicate this text to Ben Johnson. So the story is actually of a supplanted duke who returns to his dukedom in disguise and vents his bitterness and cynically assisting his supplanter. Okay, so there is this duke. Somebody else usurps into his land. Usurps whatever belongs to him. Just a moment. What is this? Some issue with the laptop. Anyways, so what the Duke does, he's banished from, banished from his land, and he decides to come back in disguise, and he vents all his bitterness on all the people who were responsible for, his him being banished. And he comes to an unexpectedly happy ending when the usurping duke gives the dukedom back to the malcontent, who then contemptuously pardons everybody, right? So a duke comes in disguise to claim back his land, and the usurping duke gives away the land to him. So the duke, who is actually, whose land gets usurped, is the malcontent here in this play, right? And then there is another text by Marston, The Dutch Courtesan. And most interesting of Marston's comedies, it is a complex, sordid story of love, lust, and conspiracy with a subplot concerning the gulling of a stupid and miserly citizen by a sprightly trickster, right? So it is very much in fashion, even he is gulling his characters the way Johnson and Marston, they were quite similar in their handling of characters. Even he is gulling his characters the way Johnson did, right? And Decker here is the Demetrius, sorry, not here, in the work Poetaster, the Poetaster. Thomas Decker is, the Poetaster was Johnson's work, and Thomas Decker was the, just a minute. Thomas Decker was the Demetrius, and he in turn ridiculed Johnson in his play Satyromatrix, or the untrussing of the humorous poet. So there's a lot of detail. There was this fight between Decker, Marston, and so they were all criticizing each other in this text. If in the Poetaster, Johnson criticized Decker, so Decker also wrote a play wherein Johnson was criticized, and that text was Satyromatrix, right? So, or the untrussing of the humorous poet. So there is a very obvious reference to Ben Johnson here in Satyromatrix, right? So we are done with Marston today. So I think this will be enough for today. And in the coming session, I am going to be discussing more dramatists with you and their works. And we will be taking Thomas Haywood and Thomas Dekker and Cyril Taverner, John Webster in greater detail. And Thomas Middleton, even he is an important playwright. His work was quoted by T.S. Eliot in Wasteland. So we need to pay a little attention to, there are interesting stories, and we will be discussing all those in the coming session. So stay tuned for that. And any question thus far? Is there any question anybody needs to ask? Now is the time. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat box either. So I assume there are no questions at your end. If there are any, you can contact me on Telegram. You can, just message me and I'll get back to you at the earliest, right? So with this, we come to the end of today's session. And I will see you again next week, same time, same platform, right? So until next time.
Aishwarya, thank you so much. This was a really great lessons from you. I'm sorry, we should call you Professor Aishwarya.
No issues.
Thank you so much.
Yes, she is our professor. Sorry, I joined late today. I was blocked on the road. I'm so sorry.
Very good evening, Your Highness. It's absolutely okay.
I joined late, but I am here, and I am so proud of you all the time. So, and proud of Brother Aish, because thanks to him, he opened everything. He's just perfect. I love him, my little Brother Aish. Thank you for everyone for being here today, and don't miss out the next course of Professor Aishwarya. Sorry, I have problem.
You always it's
Sorry,
okay.
I have always
me
problem.
Ash instead.
I love your name. I love your name, but I don't know how to pronounce it.
It's okay. You can call me Ash.
So Ash. Yes, I think it will be easier for me, Ash. So yes, it will be every Tuesday at the same hour. And thank you so much. And I invite all of you to join us for another, it will be in 1 hour from now. And we are learning motivational leadership for entrepreneurs, if you are interested in this kind of course, by Professor Rosemary Sanchez. So if anyone is interested, so please feel free to join us. Thank you. Have a wonderful and blessed evening. Thank you.
I wish the same to everybody. Thank you so much, Your Highness. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.